Standing on the front porch of my biological mother's house at 28 years old, I felt the same nervous flutter in my stomach that I had experienced 26 years earlier when she first abandoned me. But this time was different. This time she needed me, not the other way around. After 2 decades of building a life from nothing, I was no longer the desperate 2-year-old she had discarded, or the heartbroken 17-year-old she had rejected. Today, the power dynamic had completely shifted. Before I share what happened when that door opened, tell me where you are watching from, and please hit that like button if you have ever felt abandoned by someone who should have protected you. Trust me, this story takes a turn you will not expect. My earliest memories of Linda, my biological mother, exist in fragments like pieces of a broken mirror. She was 22 when she had me living in a cramped trailer on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. I remember the smell of vanilla perfume mixed with cigarette smoke that always seemed to follow her around our tiny living space. There was a brown teddy bear that I clutched constantly, and I can still recall the sound of her voice during those late-night phone conversations about money troubles and overdue bills. When I was 3 years old, everything began to change. Linda met Marcus, a sales manager, with a steady income and a clean-cut appearance that represented everything our chaotic life was not. In the beginning, Marcus seemed friendly enough toward me. He would ruffle my hair and bring me small toys when he visited. But even at that young age, I could sense the underlying tension whenever the three of us were together. I felt like an inconvenient reminder of Linda's past, a complication that did not fit into the new narrative she was trying to write. The changes started subtly. Linda became busier, more distracted. Her attention, which had previously been focused entirely on our small world of two, was now divided. Marcus began staying overnight more frequently, and I found myself eating breakfast with a man who felt like a stranger wearing a kind mask. I would catch them whispering in the kitchen, their conversations stopping abruptly whenever I entered the room. The atmosphere in our trailer shifted from chaotic but loving to something that felt calculated and cold. When I turned 4, Linda sat me down on our worn couch and explained that I would be going on a special vacation to stay with some very nice people who would take care of me. She spoke in that overly bright tone that adults use when they are lying to children, her smile too wide and her eyes avoiding mine. I remember feeling excited about this adventure, completely unaware that I was being prepared for permanent abandonment. The day she took me to the social services office remains burned into my memory with painful clarity. Linda held my hand tightly as we walked through the sterile hallways filled with fluorescent lighting and the smell of industrial cleaning supplies. I carried my brown teddy bear and a small backpack containing everything I owned. When we reached the designated room, there were adults with clipboards and serious expressions who spoke in hushed tones while I sat in a plastic chair that was too big for my small frame. Linda knelt down to my level, her eyes red with tears that confused me. She promised she would come back soon, that this was just temporary, that I needed to be a good girl for the nice people who would be taking care of me. I nodded solemnly, trusting completely in her words, because she was my entire world. The last image I have of that day is watching her walk away with Marcus's protective arm around her shoulders, while I stood in the doorway with my new caseworker, not understanding why my mother was leaving me behind. The Peterson family became my first placement in the foster care system. They were kind but overwhelmed people who already had 4 other foster children in their modest home. Mrs. Peterson had gentle hands and made excellent chocolate chip cookies, while Mr. Peterson worked construction and always smelled like sawdust and honest labor. Despite their warmth, I spent every day waiting for Linda to return and fulfill her promise to come back for me. At school, when other children talked about their parents, I would confidently tell them that my mother would be picking me up soon. I created elaborate stories about our reunion, describing the special places we would go and the things we would do together. Months turned into a full year, and gradually the crushing realization began to settle in that Linda was not coming back. She had chosen her new life with Marcus over the complicated reality of raising me. During those early years with the Petersons, I learned to become self-reliant in ways that no child should have to master. I excelled in my studies as a way to cope with the emotional pain, throwing myself into books and homework with an intensity that worried my teachers. I helped Mrs. Peterson with household chores without being asked and made sure never to cause any trouble that might give them a reason to send me away too. I had learned the hard lesson that love was conditional and that I needed to earn my place in any family that was willing to keep me. When I turned 14, everything changed again in the most devastating way possible. While browsing the internet at the local library, I accidentally stumbled across Linda's Facebook profile. My heart stopped as I scrolled through photo after photo of her perfect new life. There she was, smiling radiantly in family pictures with Marcus and two beautiful children I had never known existed. Sophia appeared to be about 9 years old, with Linda's dark hair and bright smile, while Jacob looked to be around 7 with Marcus's blue eyes and mischievous grin. The photos told the story of a family that had everything I had dreamed of during those lonely nights in foster care. There were pictures from Disneyland vacations, Christmas mornings around a tree, overflowing with presents, birthday parties in a backyard that belonged to them, and casual moments of everyday happiness that felt like daggers to my heart. The post that destroyed me completely read, "My beautiful children are my world. I am so blessed to have such an amazing family." The irony was not lost on me that I was technically one of her children, but clearly not one worthy of inclusion in her world. This discovery coincided with the most traumatic period of my teenage years. Mr. Peterson, the only stable father figure I had ever known, was killed in a car accident on his way home from work. The grief that followed was unlike anything our household had experienced. Mrs. Peterson, already struggling to manage multiple children and a tight budget, could not cope with both her emotional devastation and the financial reality of supporting our large family on her own. Within 6 months of Mr. Peterson's death, the difficult decision was made to place several of us in new homes. I found myself at 16 years old, being transferred to a group home because there were simply not enough foster families available to take teenagers. Walking away from the only stable home I had known felt like being abandoned all over again. But this time I understood that circumstances rather than choice were driving the separation. The group home was a different world entirely. Located in a rough neighborhood, it housed 12 teenagers who had aged out of traditional foster placements or had behavioral issues that made them difficult to place. The staff meant well, but they were overworked and underpaid, treating their job more like crowd control than family building. I learned to keep my head down, focus on my studies, and count the days until I could age out of the system entirely. It was during this dark period that I made the desperate decision to reach out to Linda directly. At 17, I used old documents from my case file to trace her current address. Without telling anyone at the group home, I hitchhiked across state lines to reach her suburban neighborhood, spending my saved babysitting money on bus fare and cheap motel rooms along the way. Her house was everything I had imagined and more. It sat in a well-maintained middle-class neighborhood with manicured lawns and white picket fences that looked like something from a television show. I spent an hour walking around the block, gathering courage and rehearsing what I would say when I saw her face to face for the first time in over a decade. When I finally rang the doorbell, my hands were shaking so violently I could barely press the button. The door opened to reveal Linda, now in her late 30s, looking exactly like an older version of the mother I remembered. Her recognition was immediate, and her shock was complete. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other, while she glanced nervously over my shoulder to see if any neighbors were watching this unexpected reunion. Our conversation took place entirely on her front porch. She refused to invite me inside, explaining in hushed tones that Marcus did not know about my existence, and that my presence could disrupt the life they had built together. She had never told Sophia and Jacob that they had an older sister, and my appearance threatened to unravel years of carefully constructed lies about her past. Linda offered me a crumpled $100 bill from her purse and promised to stay in touch, but her body language made it clear that she wanted me to disappear as quickly as possible. The final blow came when she said, with what I can only describe as callous practicality, "You are almost 18, Carmen. You will be fine on your own. I have responsibilities here that I cannot abandon." The irony was crushing. She spoke about responsibilities and abandonment while actively abandoning her first child for the second time in my life. I left that money on her porch and walked away with tears streaming down my face, finally understanding that I would never have the mother I had spent years hoping for. She was not the victim of circumstances I had imagined in my childhood fantasies. She was simply a woman who had chosen the easier path and was willing to sacrifice me to protect her comfortable new reality. Aging out of the foster care system at 18 was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I was finally free from the uncertainty of placements and caseworkers, but I was also completely alone in the world, with no safety net and no family support. I worked 3 jobs to support myself, waiting tables at a diner during breakfast shifts, stocking shelves at a retail store in the afternoons, and tutoring struggling students in the evenings. Every dollar I earned went toward basic survival and my education. Community college became my lifeline. I studied social work with the passionate intensity of someone who understood firsthand what children in the system needed and deserved. My professors recognized my unique perspective and natural empathy, encouraging me to pursue a bachelor's degree, despite my financial limitations. I applied for every scholarship available and graduated with honors, driven by a determination to ensure that other children would not experience the abandonment and neglect that had defined my early years. By 25, I had landed a position at a nonprofit organization that provided services to at-risk youth. My colleagues often commented on my ability to connect with the most difficult cases, not knowing that my effectiveness came from lived experience, rather than textbook knowledge. I understood what it felt like to be unwanted and discarded, and I could offer these children hope based on my own survival, rather than empty platitudes about better days ahead. It was during this period of professional growth that I met Daniel, a high school teacher, who volunteered at our organization. He was patient and kind, with an infectious laugh and a genuine interest in helping others. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than desperate need or emotional dysfunction. For the first time in my life, I experienced what healthy love looked like. Daniel never tried to fix my past or fill the void left by my family. Instead, he simply loved me as I was, while encouraging me to continue healing and growing. Together, we created the stable life I had always craved. I purchased a small house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but entirely mine. Daniel and I talked about marriage and children, making plans for a future that felt secure and hopeful. Through therapy and his unwavering support, I began to understand that my worth was not determined by my mother's choices, but by my own actions and character. Then, on a Tuesday morning when I was 28 years old, my phone rang with a call that would change everything once again. The number was unfamiliar, but something about the voice on the other end made my heart skip a beat. It sounded like Linda, but older, and strained with an edge of desperation that I had never heard before. "Is this Carmen Peterson?" the voice asked, using the last name I had taken from my foster family. When I confirmed my identity, the caller introduced herself as Sophia, and my world tilted on its axis. My half-sister, now 19 years old, was calling to tell me about a family crisis that had shattered the perfect life Linda had worked so hard to protect. Marcus had left Linda 2 years earlier, unable to cope with her increasingly erratic behavior and early signs of what would later be diagnosed as early-onset dementia. Sophia was struggling to care for their mother while trying to attend college, and Jacob, now 17, was rebelling against the entire situation by staying out all night and refusing to help with Linda's care. The woman who had abandoned me twice was now facing her own abandonment, and the children she had chosen over me were discovering that they were not equipped to handle the responsibilities that came with unconditional love. Sophia explained that during Linda's confused episodes, she often mentioned my name, asking when Carmen was coming home and wondering why I had been away for so long. The irony was painful and profound. In her deteriorating mental state, Linda was finally acknowledging my existence and expressing the longing for my presence that I had desperately wanted to hear throughout my childhood. Sophia asked if I would consider helping with care arrangements, not knowing the full history between Linda and me. She had been told that we had simply lost touch over the years, and Linda's current condition made it impossible to get accurate information about our past. As I listened to my half-sister's exhausted voice describing her overwhelming situation, I heard echoes of my own desperation from years earlier, when I had begged Linda for a place in her life. The decision to help was not about forgiveness or reconciliation. It was about breaking cycles and modeling the kind of unconditional love that I wished I had received as a child. When I arrived at Linda's house, I was struck by how much the neighborhood had deteriorated and how run down the property looked. Marcus had taken most of the assets when he left, leaving Linda and the children in a precarious financial situation that was only worsened by her mounting medical bills. Linda herself was a shadow of the confident woman who had rejected me on her front porch years earlier. The disease had aged her dramatically, leaving her frail and confused. During her lucid moments, she would look at me with a mixture of recognition and guilt that was painful to witness. She tried several times to apologize for her past choices, but I made it clear that I was not there to provide absolution or to rebuild a relationship that had never truly existed. Instead, I focused my energy on practical solutions. Using my professional connections and knowledge of social services, I arranged for Linda to be placed in a high-quality memory care facility that could provide the specialized attention she needed. I paid for her care not out of love for her, but out of compassion for the confused and frightened woman she had become. More importantly, I wanted to demonstrate to Sophia and Jacob what family responsibility looked like when it was not conditional or convenient. Sophia was initially overwhelmed by my willingness to help, not understanding why someone who had been estranged from the family for so long would step up in their time of need. As I gradually shared the true history of my relationship with Linda, my half-sister began to understand the patterns of behavior that had shaped our family dynamics. I helped her recognize the signs of emotional manipulation and taught her that love should not require the sacrifice of one's own well-being or future. Jacob was more resistant to my involvement, angry about his father's abandonment, and resentful of the responsibilities that had been thrust upon him at such a young age. I spent time with him sharing my own experiences of teenage anger and helping him understand that his mother's illness was not his fault or his burden to carry alone. Gradually, he began to see me as an ally rather than an intruder, someone who understood what it felt like to be let down by the adults who were supposed to provide stability and security. Throughout this process, Daniel remained supportive of my decision to help, while also ensuring that I maintained healthy boundaries. He understood that my involvement was not about seeking Linda's approval or love, but about taking control of my own narrative and choosing compassion over bitterness. Together, we attended family therapy sessions that helped me process the complex emotions that arose from caring for someone who had caused me so much pain. As months passed, I found unexpected healing in my ability to provide the kind of care and support that Linda had never given me. I was not doing it for her gratitude or recognition, but because I had the resources and knowledge to make a difference in the lives of my half-siblings. Sophia flourished in college once she was freed from the overwhelming burden of caregiving, and Jacob graduated high school with plans to attend community college. The final transformation came not through Linda's acknowledgement of her past mistakes, but through my own recognition of how far I had traveled from that abandoned little girl with a brown teddy bear. I realized that my mother's inability to love me consistently had never been a reflection of my worth as a person. Her limitations had shaped my character in ways that ultimately made me stronger, more empathetic, and more capable of building the kind of family I had always wanted. On my last visit to the memory care facility, Linda was having one of her clearer days. She looked at me with recognition and said simply, I am sorry I was not a better mother to you, Carmen. I nodded and told her that I forgave her not because she deserved it, but because I deserved the peace that comes with letting go of old resentments. As I walked away from that building for the final time, I carried with me the knowledge that I had chosen love over anger, healing over hatred, and hope over despair. The greatest victory was not getting revenge on the woman who had abandoned me, but showing the kind of unconditional love that I wished I had received. By breaking the cycle of abandonment and choosing compassion even when it was difficult, I had created something more valuable than the family I had lost. I had discovered that true family is built through choice and commitment rather than biology and convenience, and that the love we give to others ultimately heals the wounds that were inflicted upon us. What would you have done if you were in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between revenge and compassion when dealing with someone who hurt you deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because I truly believe that our stories of healing can help others find their own path to peace. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming adversity and finding strength in unexpected places. And please share this with someone who might need to hear that it is possible to break cycles of pain and create something beautiful from the ashes of abandonment. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you all the courage to choose love over anger, even when it feels impossible.